Welcome to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with a wide range of music personalities, from rock and roll Hall of Famers to Grammy winners and today's rising stars. Recorded from the Old Rock House in St. Louis, Missouri, here's your host, Aaron Perlut.
Welcome back to the Loadout Music Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Aaron Perlut, and today we are in for a unique guest. They're a little bit rock and roll, a little bit pop, and a little bit electronic music. Certainly a very different twist for us here in the Loadout, but excited to welcome brothers Anthony and Steven Babino, that are known as Rebel Kicks. And they've shared bills with bands like Foo Fighters and Blink-182, Mac Miller, Iggy Azalea, Incubus, and more. So it's great to have you on the show, guys. Welcome. Thank you for making time.
Thanks for having us.
So you guys kind of grew up surrounded by music. Your dad was a professional jazz musician, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, our dad used to tour the world, and he would go out in ships, and he'd be in like every single country, especially when we were little kids, and we would be lucky enough to see him like with a big band. And I remember being a kid, like 5 years old, 6 years old, and seeing him up there, and I was like, that's what I want to do right there. And I was like, I knew from the moment I was born, like I needed to do this. And I feel like Anthony feels, I can't speak for him, but he feels the same exact way.
Yeah, it was great because, growing up in a musical household, it's just something that's always been present in our lives. And so, from a young age, when we both started playing instruments, our dad would get us up on stage with him. And then as we got a little older, we would play in the big band. So we were reading down the charts and playing all that great music, from the Great American Songbook, all the Sinatra arrangements and the Tony Bennett stuff and Bobby Darin and, all those great big band charts. So we kind of have a very wide just influence range.
So when Rod Stewart started doing like the American Storybook, you weren't totally bummed out. You weren't like, oh man, come on, Rod, go back to the faces.
No, it's cool, man, because it kind of made sense to me because he would have been coming of age, or he was born through that era. So that's the music that they grew up with. It's like one of our guys, our main influences were the Beatles, but specifically Paul McCartney. And, when you listen to, he's all over the place stylistically in his writing, but you can tell that he was very, very influenced by that era of music, just because of, he's got tons of songs that he's written in that style. So yeah, it kind of made sense when Rod Stewart did those records.
No, Rod's like the ultimate chameleon, because if you look across his career, first he was, the Faces was they're honestly my favorite rock and roll band of all time, a tremendous rock and roll band, in the spirit of the Stones and some of the other great rock bands of that era. But then in the early 70s, when he went solo, he was much more of kind of like a folk rock player, because that was when Crosby, Stills and Nash was kind of tearing up the charts. And then his music became very disco oriented. Right. Then in the 80s became very pop oriented. And then, as he got aged into it, all of a sudden it was, why don't we try this Great American Storybook, because it fits perfectly with my age demographic. That guy's brilliant.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was born in 1991. So I only knew Rod Stewart as big band singer. And I remember being like 12 or 13, somewhere around there. And I was listening to In the Morning, Don't Say You Love Me. And I was like, man, who the fuck is this guy? Like, who has that voice? And I was like, that's Rod Stewart. Holy shit. Yeah, he's the man.
The Faces were remarkable. The Black Crowes, when they came out, everyone said, you guys are ripping off the Faces. And they were like, yeah, we kind of are. But, can you blame us? They're amazing. So at what point, you're growing up around this, at what point were you guys like, well, man, we want to rock, hell with this, we got to do, like, what was that point where you said, we got to chart our own path and do something that's maybe more in line with our unique tastes?
See, it's funny because our dad professionally did the big band stuff, but he grew up through the rock era. So he's really a rock guy. And so simultaneously, while we were, being exposed to all of this big band music, he was also showing us, Zeppelin and the Beatles and all the Motown stuff and like everything that he grew up with in that era. So that was heavily like influential to us, but Deep Purple and all the stuff from the 70s, the hard rock stuff. So it was always something that was on our radar, and that was primarily our biggest influence. I actually have a picture of us playing. My dad plays bass as well, so he really turned us on to all that stuff. And on the flip side, our mom likes all like the softer rock stuff like Fleetwood Mac and the Carpenters, the Eagles, all the stuff that they grew up with in that era. Then we, discovered Foo Fighters. That was a big one for us, Nirvana, Soundgarden, because that was all when we were coming up.
The Killers.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely that era.
That's funny you mentioned the Killers, because when I listen to your music, I hear that influence in your music. The Killers are a rock and roll band with some electronic influence, some pop influence. But when you strip down what they do, they're a rock and roll band.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So my understanding is, so you're welcome. So let me get this right. So Rebel Kicks began. Anthony, you walked into Steven's room and you just said, here's a bass, there's a set list, we got a gig Friday. How does that work for you? It was something like that, right? It was like you had booked a gig.
That's a true story. This was when I was in college. I had booked, I actually went with my dad one night to Lower Manhattan. A friend of his had a gig every Friday, or it might have been every Thursday night. So we went, and it was like an open jam was the second set. So they would bring people up on stage. And I went on stage, played a couple of songs, got off stage, and the owner of the place came up to me and said, "How would you like to have your own gig here every Friday night?" So I was like, that would be great. And it was really my first like real professional solo gig, because I was like 17 or 18. And Steve was still in high school. He was just really starting
14.
The bass.
I just picked up the bass, maybe like a week before that.
Yeah. And so
my dad were just getting rolling, and you're like, oh shit, I just got pubic hairs. Now I gotta go play in front of a crowd.
Yeah, it's kind of how it happened.
So my dad was playing bass initially with me on these Friday night gigs, and then he had to start going out of town a lot, and I needed a bass player. And so I walked into Steve's room, handed him the bass, had a set list of songs, handed it to him, and said, "We have a gig on Friday, go over these songs, and great, see you later."
But I mean, you had played for years, kind of like filling in and stepping in with your dad's band. So, I mean, it's not like being on a stage in front of a crowd, and I know some of that was like weddings and things like that, but I mean, it's not like it was completely foreign to you. You guys really got almost like firsthand internship as to like how this works, like how a professional music act works and ultimately gets paid for, right?
Sure. And we were lucky enough to grow up as that with my dad. As far as like playing an instrument, that was like foreign to me, and like being on stage, because I was mainly a singer, and I didn't really know what instrument I wanted to play. I went through like every single instrument, and I was like, none of them are for me. I'm just gonna sing. That's it. And then I picked up the bass, and it was like a Nirvana moment. I was like, okay, this is my instrument right now. And ever since, I've been playing it. But it's tough to like, well, first off, we didn't plan this. I swear. We both have but he's the reason that I play the bass mainly. Yeah. Like, and I actually bought a Rickenbacker just because like I love Wings, and I was a huge Wings fan even before I was a Beatles fan. So like that was like, all right, I'm gonna play and sing. If if he can do it, I can do it. So that's where I come from.
It's hard. I remember when I was first, from fronting our band, I was first trying to put together the skills of walking and chewing gum at the same time, which is really what you're doing when you're playing a stringed instrument or any instrument, and trying to find that vocal melody and that works, and it feels so awkward and clumsy, and you're just like, what the hell is going on here?
Sure.
Maybe one of the reasons I hate playing covers so much is because I got to learn somebody else's song. Whereas when I write a song, I can actually, as I'm writing, I can teach myself those things collectively together, and it's an easy process. I don't know. I just outed myself. Maybe that's it. But it wasn't. So you guys ultimately, though, ended up down in Florida, right? And that's where you first kind of started carving out what Rebel Kicks would ultimately become. Is that how it worked?
So basically, the lineage of how it happened is I made a solo record when I was in college. That kind of started off, we put a band together around that to start playing shows locally and like in the tri-state area mostly, to kind of start building a following. And then Steve and I started writing a lot together after that point. So we started co-writing a lot of songs together, and it moved away from being a solo thing. So we took that core of that same band that was playing stuff for my solo project, formed a band called Sons of Origin, and made a record with all these songs that we'd co-written. And then a few years went by, we played South by Southwest. We were doing stuff all over the place.
Played Bamboozle in New Jersey.
Yeah.
That was fun.
We played the last Bamboozle festival that they ever did, which was really, really fun. But then a few years went by. We ended up going down to Florida because a good friend of ours, another tremendous singer-songwriter named Dan Orlando, he got a deal down there, development deal. And we were recording and writing stuff with him as well. And so we went down there, and we weren't planning on moving there. It just so happened that we went down there and we stayed there because of this deal and developed a ton of his material. And through doing that, started developing our own thing. And we started collaborating with his producer. And we did a bunch of really, really interesting work, but it was really primarily pop focused, like just straight up pop music. And so we were considering going in that direction for a little while. And then just, I don't know, something just never really connected with us, just because we are just at our heart rock guys. So through that process, we ended up kind of circling back. We went out to LA from Florida, worked with a couple of different producers, and using like a lot of the tricks and stuff that we learned working in the studio in Florida, just as far as like pop production and how they put these things together. We kind of used that knowledge and then spun it back around and did a 360, combined it with our rock sensibilities, and became this entirely new thing. So we were talking about, what should we just stick with the old name that we had, which didn't feel right to us because it moved away so far from that thing that it was, which was just straight up alternative rock. And then one day we were in the car together, we were looking for a new name for the band. And it was right around the time, I think it was 2017. We were on the way to a gig, and the song Feel It Still by the band Portugal the Man was out. And it was before it was really, really popular. It had just started gaining steam. We were in the car listening to the alternative station. It was on, and Steve turned to me and he goes, "I really like that line in the song, 'I'm a rebel just for kicks.'" He's like, that's an interesting little phrase. What would you think about Rebel Kicks as a name? And I was like, that kind of fits the vibe of what we're doing, just even on a lyrical side, for all the stuff that we were developing at that point. It like inadvertently had a socio-political commentary for a lot of the songs that we were writing. Kind of
It's also got kind of a punk rock feel to it.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, like a 90s era punk rock feel.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's funny you mentioned South by Southwest, and we played there this year. And I always tell people, like, "Oh, that's so cool, you played there." I'm like, it sounds a lot cooler than it really is, because you don't like the length of your set. You're staying in some shitty hotel, and you're scrounging, and life on the road sometimes is not grand.
It can be interesting. It depends on who you're staying with. Luckily, we have all the members in our band. So, but interesting in South by, when we were playing, it was the second day we played. We were on a rooftop, and it was raining. It was like drizzling, and there were 3 people on the rooftop, I think. And we were above the main street, right? And it was packed. Like the whole place was packed. So I was like, oh man, this is going to be one of those shitty gigs. Like we're just going to have to play to like 3 people, and it's kind of drizzling. And so we started one of our songs, and we're about halfway through the song. And I like look up, and the whole rooftop is filled. At least 500, 600 people. And then all of a sudden, by the middle of the song, they're singing our lyrics back to us. And I was like, okay, this is cool. That was like the coolest moment for me, because I was like, all right, that makes it worth it to come down here.
Well, I mean, also, it's kind of you had to have that correlation of, it's kind of our Beatles moment too, didn't you?
Right. Oh yeah. It's one of it's your dream. Like that's my dream, to like be in Madison Square Garden and have the entire place singing my lyrics back to me. It's like a microcosm of that, I guess.
Yeah. Which, reminds me that recently The Cure sold out 3 straight nights at MSG, which says a lot for the power of The Cure. I mean, just how popular. I've never been a Cure guy, but their fans are rabid, and it's another band that when I first started listening to your music, I was like, I see where this kind of comes from, that synth rock of the 80s, some of the better synth rock bands like The Cure.
Oh, for sure.
That to me, the Killers are kind of a direct reflection of, without all the creepy makeup. But
yeah, it's true, man. I mean, the thing about all those, the reason why bands like The Cure they still sell out the Garden and they're still relevant, is because of the great songs. It always goes back to the song. I always say this, it doesn't matter what genre you like or whatever. A great song is a great song is a great song. It doesn't matter when it was written or recorded. If it's a great song, it stands the test of time. That's why Billy Joel still sells out Madison Square Garden every month. There's something about like when there's a connective tissue to these things, it transcends generations. It's music like that.
Banking off of that, a lot of those new wave bands, like they incorporated a lot of electronica, and like that's what I love too. But banking off of what he said, like their songs are great. In Excess, Tears for Fears. I mean, they all have, like The Cure, they have these great songs that are memorable, and the hooks are memorable. And I think that's what Anthony and I try to like lean towards. Like, all right, we still want to like write a great song, A, B, and make a hook like that keeps you singing.
Yeah, it is funny because my writing is very storytelling. It's very narrative oriented, but for my taste as a music listener, like I know some people that they listen to a song once and they seem like they already know the entire word by heart. I'm more listening for that hook, that big guitar just to fly down all of a sudden, and holy shit. Well, I mean, the Foo Fighters do that a lot. I mean, they have great hooks. They'll be just like totally rocking out, and then all of a sudden like boom, boom, and you're like, holy shit, that's amazing.
Yeah, there's a certain like melodic sensibility about that stuff, especially like the way Dave Grohl writes hooks. And it's funny because our dad's not particularly, he grew up in the rock era, but he's not into like screamy stuff. So when we first started getting into Foo Fighters stuff, like especially the earlier stuff, there's a lot of that going on because it's coming out of that grunge era. But there's something about the way Dave writes hooks that even my dad, he's not really particularly into that style, there's something about it that he's like, man, these tunes are really good, so he can listen almost past the screaming vocals, which doesn't really appeal to his sensibilities, and be like, this is actually a really great pop song.
Yeah.
Just at the heart of it.
So the Metallica selections are pretty light in your father.
I would say so.
We had to discover that on our own.
Yeah. So I know your first record, which came out a couple years ago, A Portrait of a Man Part 1. My understanding is that you guys, the two of you, you write, you record, you produce, you play all the instruments for the most part. How does that process work? How do you approach creating music? And that's, I mean, it's a really impressive thing. I mean, so many, even young bands will go hire session musicians, but I mean, that's a pretty remarkable thing that you guys are able to, be together in a studio and just crank that shit out.
Thank you. I think it's important to be a chameleon, like you were saying, with Rod Stewart, and this guy also does the same thing. And we want to emulate after that. I mean, we both can play multiple instruments, and I know what's in my head. He knows what's in his head. And, obviously, if I'm not going to go out and like play the drums on my own album, so we have an amazing drummer. We actually have a session tomorrow that we're going to use our drummer for and like do something like that. But if it's like a keyboard, or if it's something like, we know what's in our head, and we know what needs to be in the song, and we know what the song needs. I don't know if you want to add on to that.
It always, the way we write, there's no like set process really. It always starts with an idea that's either from either one of us. So I'll bring something to him, or he'll bring something to me, and then we'll develop it together.
Is it usually a composition first, and then trying to find the right lyrics that go with that composition?
I would say on the whole, it starts with the music first, with a melody idea or a musical idea, but we have done it every way imaginable. Like, I have written just words, and then we'll write the music around it. But I would say that on the whole, it starts musically first, and then we'll find a hook line or something that we think fits the vibe of the music. So that's how we collaborate on these things. Since we don't live together anymore, but when we did live together, we would just walk into each other's rooms and, play our ideas for each other. But now, as we live apart, we we'll like record basic demos in our home studios, send them back and forth to each other, which was really helpful during, lockdown and COVID, because we physically couldn't see each other at all. And so we would send each other files and then create demos that way. But, we still do that now just because of the convenience of it. So we can just knock stuff out fairly quickly that way. And like tomorrow, we're going into a studio in Brooklyn with our drummer, Dan. And we're going to just have him overlay drums over stuff that we did at home already. So we have a foundation that's pretty much ready to go. And then we'll just finish up the overdubs, and we'll have a couple of new songs ready. So
yeah, I even find today, it's so easy just to pull out your phone and do a voice memo for like if you've got something, you don't want to lose it. Sometimes I'll record something on my phone, and then I'll even send it to my bandmates, say, what do you think about this? This is, obviously really rough. You guys ever do that for each other as well?
Dude, literally 10 minutes before this interview, I was literally on my phone on the voice memo. I have, I think, 1,000 voice memos. Pretty sure it's like taking up all the space in my phone, but literally 10 minutes, I was like, oh, this is an awesome melody. And I was just about to send it to Anthony after this interview's over. So yeah,
sometimes I do it via video, and then I ask myself, that's so much larger of a file. Why the hell didn't I just do a voice memo? They don't need, to see me in a ball cap and underpants my guitar. It makes zero sense. So I know you've got a new EP. It's two. I've listened to most of it, especially the singles, Silhouette and Electrophoria. How do you guys differentiate what's, to me, some of the differentiations are pretty obvious, but in your mind, how is this record different from the first album and some of the singles you've had in between?
I think that, well, those two songs are interesting because they were created in very different circumstances. So the first one, Silhouette, it's not one of the songs where we're playing everything. We actually recorded and co-wrote that song with two really talented producers, Jackson Hoffman and Ryder Stewart. And we met them. We had done a song previously called We Should Go Missing with them. And this song was very much written in the same way as that, which is to say that we went to the studio and we had just a very, very basic riff idea. So we all sat in a circle in the studio and I played them this opening guitar riff. They really liked it. And then we started developing a melody around this riff. And it's really fun writing with other people because you're getting all of their influences coming in as well, right? So we're just kind of spitballing in this circle in the studio. And once we knocked that melody out and the whole structure of the song in like a half hour.
Yeah.
And as we're doing that, because we're in the studio, like Jackson ran in to the booth and played a drum track live while Steve played his bass. And then I overdubbed a guitar part, and then Ryder overdubbed a guitar part. And we're doing this as we're now throwing out ideas for lyrics. So we're all looking on our phones and going through our notes, because every songwriter's got voice memos and a ton of notes with lyric snippets and ideas.
My lyrics all the time, man.
Right. So we're looking through, and I had this phrase that involves Silhouette, and I threw that out to everyone, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that's really interesting," they were like, "Well, what does that mean to you?" And I was like, "It would be interesting to use silhouette as a metaphor for a person that you're in a relationship with, that you kind of built up in your mind before you really got to know them. And you have this idealized version of this person, but then once you really get to know them, you wish you could go back to your blissful ignorance before you really knew who they were." So
the first part of that is honestly, it's the case in almost every relationship, is that,
right.
I mean, and it doesn't need to be romantic. It can be personal. It can be business. It's
right.
You go in more often than not with an ideal of what this other human being is like, because we all inherently judge books by covers.
Sure.
And then it's the prove out point, like they prove out to you who they are. So yeah, that's interesting. So what's next for you guys? Is it more EPs? The process for dropping music these days, because of algorithms, has really changed, and it's more gotten focused on EPs and singles, or is it just getting on the road and because typically today, because you don't make that much money off records, it's touring. Touring is kind of, you go promote the record, but it's really, the record is just an excuse to get on the road where you can make some money.
Right.
So what's next?
That's kind of where we're heading towards. We just dropped our latest single, Electrophoria, which was it was actually, just a little background behind that song. I was commissioned to do this indie horror movie, and it just never came to fruition. But the guy asked me, he's like, "I love Rebel Kicks. You guys are, you have this amazing sound, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "You think you can do like this underground dance scene, like you're in a club, but like almost like Trent Reznor-ish?" And I was like, "I got you." I got you. So I was like, so I sent it to him, and he was like, "Oh, the the movies, blah blah blah, it's being held up." And I was like, "Whatever, fuck it. I'm gonna take it for myself." So we were sitting on like this like bed of music for almost like a year, maybe half a year, and then all this AI stuff started coming out, like like Paul McCartney was singing Imagine, and like all this, like it's like happening all over and I was like, this is such an interesting like concept of what's happening right now, and you can either accept what's happening or you can go against it, but like you got to accept it because it's like this is the future. So I was like, let's write about that. So that's kind of like what that song's about, and we actually just got to play it on Good Day New York, which was a lot of fun. That was like such a cool moment for us because I've never been in a studio like a studio like that before. So we got to play it live, and that was great. And hopefully we'll be touring off of that. So like the next thing I think will be like, we're trying to plan a tour in Europe for next October, which would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Now that you mention it, that song does have a feel of a far less creepy Nine Inch Nails. You know what I mean?
Thank you. I like the pun too. That's great.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. We talked about the Foo Fighters, and I know you guys have shared a stage with them, which I'm sure was just kind of one of those experiences for you. Where like, holy shit, this is happening. What's like when you think of, like, my wife would always ask me, what's the pinnacle for you? And I would set my standards pretty low, just because, getting any notoriety in music is so hard because there's so many great musicians out there that don't get a sniff of fame or notoriety. What's for each of you, I'm sure each of you have different ideals on this, but what's like the pinnacle for you, or at least the next hurdle you really want to conquer?
I don't know. I don't really necessarily think of it in terms like that. I look at it in two ways. I feel very, very lucky to be able to do music for a living. And I feel even luckier that I get to front this band and co-write these songs and record and share a stage with my brother, who's my best friend. So it's just, family's the most important thing to us. It always has been. And to be able to do that with him is the greatest thing in the world to me. So for us, I think like to be able to just build this band together, just, I think if we can develop a loyal audience that can sustain a career in original music, like that's I mean, what could be better than that, and then however high it goes, that's great. So
it's less about the destination and more about, like, I'm not going to fucking use the word journey because I'm so sick. This is a very journey, but it's more about this trip that you guys are on together.
It's the friends you made along the way. That's it.
Yeah. But I mean, Anthony, it's pretty touching how much you clearly are enjoying because you're doing it with your brother. And you totally one up Steve there, because how is he going to top that? I mean,
a hell of a better answer than I was going to give. I was going to be like, oh, I want to be a band and I want to open up. I was like, what the fuck can I say now?
Open for the Cure. I want to play Madison Square Garden.
That would be great.
What a Killers to open for us. All right, Steve, you got to give us something here.
Essentially, yes, yeah, absolutely. I love playing with my brother. It's the best feeling in the world. Like and we're both fronting the band, and we're both feeding off each other's energy, and you can't beat that. You really can't. But also going off of what I was going to say is, like for that is like the goal is right to have like a loyal audience and like for every tens of thousands of people to come to see us in every state and every country. And but like for now, I think just trying to get on bills and play festivals as many as we can, and we love playing live. Like it's you can't beat that energy when you're like playing in front of people, you know.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of like the main goal right now is to like get in front of people, as many as we can, and like show them how good we are. That's basically it.
Right on. Anthony and Steve Babino, they are Rebel Kicks. They have a new EP out right now that you should definitely go check out and sample some of the 5 songs that are on it. Guys, thank you so much for being on the Loadout.
Aaron, thank you so
Aaron.
much.